want to welcome everyone here to another edition of the ongoing lecture series on the Renaissance Principle in Universal History. And I'll just say a couple of words before giving the stage over to Quan. For those, I think everyone here has already been to several, if not all, of the previous lectures. This is the 5th in the series. We're going to have one more next week before we transition on Canada Day, July 1st, into a new class cycle, which will go on for about 8 weeks. So far, the idea that the organizing theme that we've been trying to work around is the concept that every single culture in the world, what is culture, right? So obviously we're born, we die. We're given a certain interval of time in our lives, regardless of what part of the world we're from, whether it's from Africa or Asia, whether it's South America, Argentina, Canada, the US, Australia. We have a temporal frame. But there is something about us that allows us to willfully develop ourselves according to certain discoverable principles and develop relationships with minds of those who have no physical connection to ours, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and also into the future with lives unborn, right? So this ability to transmit ideas and to improve upon discoverable ideas and translate those into better ways of organizing our society through new forms of technology, new forms of resources that were not resources before. Things like the Iron Age. Before the Iron Age, iron was not a resource. That required discoveries. Immaterial metaphysical concepts had to be generated. Hypotheses had to be generated, tested, and applied in order to increase the boundary conditions of human life, both in terms of the material, but also the intellectual and spiritual domains. And every single culture comes about it in its own unique way, just like every individual comes about their discoveries in their own unique way, because we are all individuals. There's no two snowflakes that are alike, and it's even more, the individualization is even greater when it comes to a human being. However, there's certain, you wouldn't say it's all, there's thus no universality or no common denominator. And there's a certain quality of spirit, of emotion, of discovery, whenever a certain type of discovery is made that relates our minds to the organizing structures of the universe. This is something which, again, every single culture has showcased in its own way. And we want to appreciate the differentiation of all cultures, but at the same time, we want to investigate the Renaissance qualities. What is it that brought about the greatest explosions of progress, of creative ideas in science and arts, in architecture, in every single culture? And today, I mean, we've already looked at the Islamic cultural matrix. We've looked in previous weeks at the Jewish, the Christian, the Confucian, a little bit, but not very much, dynamics in world history. We've looked at the fight for Platonic Christianity during the time of the collapse of the Roman Empire, and we've looked at certain battles being waged by people like Socrates and Cicero, who fought to save the souls of Athens as well as the Roman Republic before either of those two places were perverted to become empires. So, and again, next week we'll have Dave, who will be developing a little bit upon the ideas of Dante Alighieri, who did something very special during the medieval period of Europe, which relates to all of the other classes. Today, Dr. Le, who's been a friend for quite some time, and is a pretty spectacular scholar in his own right, who has developed many, many unique insights into world history, geopolitics, and especially cultures, religion, philosophy. We'll be tackling Chinese philosophy, religion, spirituality, and ethics in a short discussion today. And I'll just leave that, I think, right there for Quan to pick up and take as he sees fit. It's all yours.
You're not recording.
I am.
Okay, thank you, Moose. We have here. Okay. So, do you hear me well?
Indeed.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks everyone. So I hope that our conversation will be very interactive today. So don't hesitate to interrupt me if you want to jump in and have some explanation or some comments on what I'm saying. So my subject is an overview of Chinese religion, spirituality, and ethics. So with no further ado, I would like to start with a short quotation from chapter 11, section 12 from the book of Confucius, known in the West as the Analect and in Chinese as the Lun Yu, simply meaning selected sayings. Okay, so one of his disciples asked him how to serve the spirits. So Confucius answered that you cannot serve man. How when you serve the spirit? So the same disciple asked, how when I serve the dead? So Confucius answered him that you cannot serve the living. How can you serve the dead? And the same disciple asked about death. So Confucius answered, you don't understand life. How will you understand death? So now I would ask to everyone and just jump in spontaneously. Do you think that Confucianism, is it a religion, a philosophy? Is it atheist? Is it agnostic? So it's your turn now to have some comments or explanation.
I have a cursory, I have done a cursory reading of Confucius, and I think it's more of a philosophy, a way of life than a religion as such.
Okay. What do you think about his answer to his disciple that you don't understand life? How will you understand death? How did you understand it? Is it in his mind there is no afterlife, or it's beyond us? What is your opinion?
I don't think he's saying that there's no afterlife. He's telling the whoever is questioning him to focus on what is before you first, to start from there and then go to the more complex and transcendent questions. So
Okay, interesting. That's certainly one possible interpretation. That's for sure. Are there other interpretations?
Something that's very clear in my background's in Chinese medicine, so we do a lot of Taoist and Confucian study. A lot of people think that Taoism and Confucianism are opposites, but it's very clear that Confucius had a Tao, and he talked about the Tao all the time. And even as the Taoists like to, criticize and belittle certain things in Confucianism, I think actually it was a lot more friendlier in that kind of mutual encouragement than it looks.
Quan, could you do me the favor of rereading that quote one more time from Confucius?
Yes, for sure. So Jilu is the name of the disciple. Okay, Jilu asked, um, how can I serve the spirits? So Confucius answered, you cannot serve man. How can you serve the spirit? Then Jilu asked another question, what is death? He asked about death. So Confucius answered, you don't understand life. How will you understand death?
I have a question.
Yes.
Why can't he serve man? I don't get it. Did I miss something before? He asked us if he can serve the spirits, and he says you can't serve man. How can you serve the spirits? Why can't he serve man?
Well, what Confucius meant that he served man in a very bad way, in an unsatisfactory way. That's why he's not even capable to serve man in a satisfactory way. So there's no way he would be capable to serve the spirits.
Okay.
So in a way, he's saying don't reach too high. First, learn to serve man, and then talk about the spirit.
Yes, the first sentence is probably easier to interpret than the second one. Exactly.
Yeah, because the first one, yeah, it's a little bit more like I like the fact that he seems to not be dichotomizing with an absolute wall the material world of man and the world of the spirit, of spirituality. Like there's no dichotomy, because you have to qualify through the one domain before you can start to do justice to the higher domain, it appears to me.
Exactly.
The second part on the mortality, how you haven't learned to live, is yeah, it's,
I have to admit that I I have the same kind of interpretation than Assad, because most philosophers, especially in the West, they would use that second sentence to say that Confucius doesn't believe in the afterlife. But I think that he believes in the afterlife, but he considers it as something transcendental, and that we have to understand what is in front of us first. And if we accomplish what is on earth first, we can go beyond. And maybe we have to create heaven on earth first before uh, digging deeper in the realm of the spirits.
That sounds really dangerous to me.
Okay, interesting. Please go on.
My understanding of Confucius is the duties are what's more important than the result. And that seems to be a generally spiritual orientation of, say, Islam or Christianity. To have the idea of you're going to create a material heaven, that's kind of 666 kind of stuff.
I guess I would ask the question, well, it really comes down to what's our idea of paradise. Before we can react to what that even means, we have to recognize what is paradise.
Interesting. Interesting.
Not recognize, but at least ask ourselves, what do we mean by this?
I like it because is paradise necessarily something in the afterlife, or is it something that can be created on earth? I think that we have a big domain of reflection and interrogation here.
There's certainly not a uniform idea of paradise, perfection. I mean, as soon as you start getting into that idea, there's a lot of dispute. People have a lot of subjectivity that they bring into it. Like, you know, one person's idea of what a perfect world is often very different from another's. So yeah, there is a domain of discussion, it's true, that is worth having, I suppose, about what is this. Yeah.
Okay.
Like some people would say, like, for example, for me coming at it from you know, in my Western sort of cultural matrix experience, I had a lot of exposure to Protestant Christianity and stuff, and so there's a dispute already there between whether paradise is this state of ignorance in the garden before mankind fell into sin by eating from the tree of knowledge. So there was that perfect state of fixed, no change, when we were just happy living like other animals. And then other views, like we've encountered with the discussion on St. Augustine, have this idea that no, it's the pursuit of knowledge that allows us to improve things ever more, but without, you know, necessarily an end result through knowledge.
An absolute
Not an absolute end. Yeah, not this like perfect fixed state at the end of the day. So you got these different ideas that contrast. I'm guessing similar things creep up in Confucius's world too, and the Taoist world.
Exactly. And I think that what Lionel mentioned at the beginning is very interesting, and I want to come back to that. In the time of Confucius in the 6th century BC, each school would name his own theory a Tao, okay, a way, okay? So in modern time, the term Tao has been used only for Taoism, but Confucius disciples would call the way of their teacher, the Tao also. So there were plenty of Tao. Even that, if today that meaning is very restricted. I think that all of you know that Confucius was born in 551 BC and he died in 479 BC. Okay, just a reminder, Socrates was born in 470 BC or 469 BC, depending of the book you're reading. Plato was born in 428 BC, and most of the people would accept that the Buddha was probably born around 560 BC. The true Buddhists would say, no, 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 he was born in 657 BC. So I would say that there is a big gap of a century for the birth of the Buddha. But anyways, all those guys were born around more or less the famous axial age of Jaspers, meaning the 6th century BC, that there were plenty of brilliant people that would be the founders of great civilizations. So this, I wouldn't go to the second quotation, which is a little bit longer, and it serves as a kind of map for personal development. Okay, so personal development is not a contemporary thing. It's already there in the 6th century BC, and it's in chapter 2, section 4 of the Analects for people interested in that. Okay, so he said, at 15, I set my heart on learning. At 30 years old, I took my stand. You have to understand, I took my stand in society. I took my stand in the state, right? In life. At 40, I was without confusion. At 50, I was able to hear the will of heaven. And we will discuss what he means or what he wanted to mean by heaven. At 60, I was capable to hear the will of heaven without complaint. And at 70, I was capable to follow the desires of my heart without overstepping the bounds. Right? So when I will speak of Buddhism, it would be almost the same step, but Confucius did not mention the first step, which is physical development. Okay, because let's not forget that the body is essentially complete at 15, okay, when you have your sexual organs completed, even if there is still a certain development between 15 and 18, 19, 20, of course. And modern neurobiology teaches us that the brain at 18 years old is not exactly the same brain at 21, okay? But in ancient times, people were adult at 14 years old, okay? You know that Romeo and Juliet, Romeo was probably 13 and a half, and Juliet was probably 12 and a half. So uh, that's why when he said at 15, I set my heart on learning, you have to understand it as the endeavor of a young adult. Okay, before I start to give comments on that, do you have spontaneous reactions about that quotation?
I just didn't catch a word that you said. A young, I'm hearing like
Young
adapt or,
adept.
huh? Oh, okay.
Adept, oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay, so do you have any spontaneous reactions to that before I give a kind of explanation?
At 15, an individual is really, it's all about the heart for him. Although his body has grown into adulthood, but his heart is so much full of passions, and that's, I think that's where he needs to learn how to wade through this journey ahead of him.
Very interesting, because as you guys know, you have three kinds of learning. Learning about infos, learning about skills, and learning how to be, right? Forming your character. Of course, when he say learning, it's about the info, it's about skills, of course, but it's about essentially and foremost about forming your character. And as Asad said, it's about the heart, how to deal with your desire, how to deal with your intention. I'm happy that at the first comment we get on the essential of that.
I think it's self-evident. He's saying. I think he has encapsulated his thought in these sayings with that certain intention in mind, that it should be clear and easy to get across. So it isn't much of an effort to understand him.
Well, you would be
I put in a little bit of a spanner in the works again. And in the Steiner system, which I think has a lot going for it, 15 is approximately the age where you start thinking rationally. So they have like 0 to 7 or something like the will develops, like the animal will, and then it's more the affect, more the feelings and sensations, and then rationality comes in at about 15. And when you speak about the heart as well, it's only really relatively modern thing that we associate the heart with a kind of sentiment. I mean, especially in Chinese and Islamic, the heart and the qalb has always been about the intellect, the capital I intellect, I suppose. So that's another possible interpretation.
Interesting, exactly. Other comments?
Well, there's definitely an idea of I mean, because how many stages there did he include? It was like 6 stages of life, where he
Seven.
seven stages of progression.
I'm sorry, Matthew, you're right. There are 7 stages of life, but he ignored the physical growth. So he mentioned only 6 stages.
I see everything. So he starts at 15 or something, right? That's
exact, would be the second stage, exactly.
I see. Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's without saying, without going off on a tangent too much, but I think it's definitely reminiscent a little bit of the idea that we've encountered many times through looking at some of the writings of Schiller, who devoted a lot of effort into the idea of ennobling a society which would be capable of desiring what their duty compelled them, instead of always having this schism, this combat between duty and desire, which so many people are trapped in. Schiller always focused on the goal that we could cultivate ourselves in accordance with a directionality that would bring us into harmony with ourselves, so that we wouldn't have these constant fights with our consciences, our lusts, and other things that would always allow our self-interest to come undone ultimately. So what Confucius was saying reminded me a little bit of that discussion.
Exact.
Quan, is he?
Yes.
Sorry, you said I think you spoke about why he ignored the physical growth of the individual. Is he ignoring it purposely?
Yes, because he considered that the physical growth is in the hand of nature. Okay, and there's a dichotomy in the Confucian thinking. What is spontaneous, meaning what is in the hand of nature, unless you have big disease or you got a big trauma when you was born and an accident or things like that, which is not in the spontaneous flow. But if your life were in the spontaneous flow from 0 to 15, it was simply normal that at 15 you have an adult body. That's all. And from that adult body, he wanted to stress on the spiritual and the psychological journey of an adult. He's not speaking of the education for children. Okay, that's another affair.
So what is the next stage after 15?
Okay, at 30, I took my stand. Okay, so in the translation, it's only I took my stand, but what we have to understand that I took my stand in life, I took my stand in society.
It sounds a little bit like a stand against something, from the wording of it at least. That you are more you have some certain convictions by 30, and that you are ready to fight for your, you know, what you think is right.
For example, the corruption at court. Let's not forget that he was from the small nobility. So the small nobility is the pool from which the court would get the minor civil servants. So he took his stand in the court because he took his stand in life. But in his case, it was at the court. And I would say that he took his stand for his own convictions. And as in many court, it was quite corrupted.
What is the next? Could you go through again the next phases after 30?
Yeah, at 40, I was without confusion.
So he was disillusioned at 40.
That's one interpretation, but there's another one.
Yeah,
so like it wasn't
a negative one. So maybe he's seeing things clearly now at 40.
Yes, interesting. Can you develop more on that? He see things clearly, but what?
His own self.
Okay.
And
you're burning because the key concept there is the self. Yes.
His own place in the society.
Okay. Okay, I give you a hint. His own place in the society is in one kingdom, but at the frontier of that first kingdom, there is a door to another kingdom.
So maybe now he can concern himself with the life to come.
Yes, exactly. Okay. He did ignore the physical development. Okay, so let's say that's step 1. At 15 is steps 2. At 40 is step 3. Okay, and after that I will make some parallel with the Buddhist teaching. Okay, 1, 2, 3 is the animal kingdom. Okay, nothing negative when I say the animal kingdom. Okay, you have lion animals, you have human animals. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 is the animal kingdom. What do human animals do? Well, they grow up physically, they grow up psychologically, they grow up socially, they take their stand in society. Okay, and he said at a moment that he defined at 40 years old, he was without confusion. Okay, he see clearly the frontier between the animal kingdom and, let's say, the divine kingdom, if you give me the permission to use that word. Okay, because divine is a little bit problematic in the Confucian word, but that's okay. Let's use it. Okay, the line, the frontier between the animal kingdom and the divine kingdom.
Mm-hmm. There's a parallel in the Islamic doctrine also with this, because there was I was having a debate with this guy, and I told him that in the Quran the age of adulthood is when you are able to procreate, right? So at 13 or 14 or in modern times by 18 years old legally. And he disagreed with me. He said that that's one way of interpreting adulthood, but the actual spiritual adulthood begins at 40. and he showed me a few verses from the Quran which were talking about Moses becoming a prophet at 40 and Muhammad becoming a prophet at 40, and certain, you know, there's a shift in their journey, there's a shift in their own philosophies also. So
Exactly.
that's what comes to mind.
Yes, and in Hinduism, you probably know that there's the concept of born twice. You first born biologically, and biological adulthood is when you're capable to procreate, as you said.
Mhm.
And biologically, it's possible between 13 years old and 15 years old, okay, more or less. And you perfectly, well, that's my own interpretation, okay, for that line. I was without confusion, meaning that I know the boundary between my duties in the animal kingdoms, and now I'm at the beginning of a new adventure. I am an adult now in the divine kingdom.
Okay, so Quan, is this all part and parcel of, it's Kathleen Marie
Yeah,
speaking.
hi.
Is this all, hi, is this all part and parcel of like one's personal journey?
Exactly.
Like that sort of applies. Yeah, so this applies to everyone. You're going to go through this journey, and you're going to reach a threshold at the point of 40. Is that an arbitrary number or year, or is that 30 or 15? Are those arbitrary numbers, or are those just sort of, you know, numbers that are used with you know, some experience, you know? Maybe it could be 16, you know, maybe 17 for some people, right? It varies, right? It's a variable. It's not a absolute, right?
Exactly.
So at the time of 40, for instance, so the person can be sort of understood or expected to have achieved that they've advanced through the animal kingdom, and now they're on that threshold where they can start this kind of transcendental thinking or thought process or considerations?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Just quickly, Claude, would you say that, let's say, rationalization or a low reason, is that included in the animal world?
Oh, yes, yes, because we are human animals. So, we have that capability to have a rationalization, reasoning that a crocodile doesn't have. So it's part of our animal kingdom.
So something divine is higher, I suppose. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about that.
Yes, exactly. Because let's not forget that the mind has an animal part and a divine part. When you go to school and you learn, you repeat what your teachers are teaching you, but you don't have a true reflection on it, that you simply follow the crowd. That's the animal kingdom. But if you use the mind to have a reflection, to create your own representation of the world, to create new theories, that's the divine in you. And it's no more the animal, even if it's always the mind.
Like that.
Even animal, the word actually signifies that there is a soul
Exact.
in that. So
Right, animus. Yeah.
Exact. So the word animal is not bad for me, okay? It's only show a certain stage of development, that's all.
It's certainly lower. That's not just disparage, it's just lower.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, simply that, simply that. Or it's only it's a hint for us that there is something higher. It's an invitation to keep on the journey.
As Matt said, like to not separate internally, to not make a division between duties and desires. This is essential to have a good foundation here.
Exactly, exactly. I like it. I like that interpretation. the animal is the essential foundation for something beyond.
Mm-hmm. That's true, because if you look at animals in a natural state, their duties and their desires tend to be very much in alignment. For the most part, I mean, if you take a cat or something into domestication, like we have one who's, maybe I overfeed her or something, so she develops a bit of an eating habit disorder. But for the most part, in nature, they will stop eating when they're full. They will hunt when they're hungry. But there's no the perversions of nature do not tend to appear as they do in a human society, which tends to run into the trap of falling into decadence and overdoing one thing or another, so that your duty and desire run amok. They fall out of whack.
Exactly. And after, I will make some parallel with book 4, 5, and 6 of the Republic by Plato, when he's speaking of the black horse, the white horse, and the charioteer. Okay, that's another image of that human development.
Mm.
In this tradition, mankind is called Ashraful Makhluqat, which translates as the most privileged among all creation. So all, like, it is the king of all animals, or God's playing God in the animal kingdom.
Absolutely. I agree with that. We are the kings of the animals, not the lion. That's for sure.
What is that term again, Asad?
Ashraful Makhluqat. Ashraf, it means someone who is blessed or someone who is privileged. Makhluqat is the plural of makhluk, which means creation. So man is the Ashraful Makhluqat, although it's not. It's a cliche now.
Is that pretty much alongside the idea of us being Khalifa?
Yeah.
So not just with the power, but also the responsibility and duties to be caretaker.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you got the idea in the Christian matrix as well, of the idea that we are, I mean, part and parcel of Genesis of being fruitful and multiplying is that we're mandated to be stewards of nature. That doesn't necessarily, some right-wing neoconservative like fundies might interpret that as man's right to just pave all of nature and subdue it in a very Hobbesian way, like it's us versus nature. But I think that, yeah, there's much more healthy currents from the Christian matrix as well. It is understood that as being like, nature is not bad, nor are we commanded to suppress it and subdue it in a literal sense, but rather to be stewards and to cultivate the lower but still good domain of creation.
Brings to mind something Nietzsche said. Can I bring him?
All right, what?
Yes, please.
Man has robbed all animals of their virtues.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's his way of saying the same thing, but with his touch of dark humor and irony.
Okay.
I could add something on that.
Who just
Brian.
spoke?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, Brian. Yeah, hey, Brian. Yeah, go for it.
Just further on that, about man being the king. A lot of, like, take for example the extraterrestrial imperative, and also if you go back to Christian doctrine, that as you mentioned, Matt, it's man's duty to go forth and multiply. And oftentimes I've told people that indeed the universe is man's. If man can live up to the real dignity of humankind and explore and expand our creativity. A lot of people view that as being, egocentric, as being, oh, man's a dirty animal and just, he's screwing the earth up. So why do you want to go to space to do that? So the only point I'm making is that the notion of humankind not dominating, but expanding into our, using our creativity, expanding through our world and indeed to our universe, is that humanist notion, the notion of that mankind is good intrinsically. That's all I got to say.
Okay. So, any comments before I go to the next step? Okay, so let's go to the next step. Next step, a 50 years old, I know the will of heaven. And I truly want to hear your guys' opinions, explanation, hypothesis. What is the will of heaven?
Well, well,
And what is heaven?
It sounds a little bit like the guy has given up. It's like, okay, my health is declining. That's the will of heaven. I'm gonna die soon. That's the will of heaven. I could do only that much. That's the will of heaven. And then he's gonna start rationalizing the heavens.
I would say that that's one interpretation, but Asad, try to find another one.
Is this related to mandates? And is this related to, well, I mean, you said that there's a problem with Confucian in the word divine, but surely what we're talking about, destiny and submitting to your destiny, that's a big Chinese thing.
Okay, interesting. But when you say destiny, is it something that you discover or something that you have to create?
I think the modern idea would be something you have to create, especially on the kind of new agey self-empowerment kind of thing. But the traditional point of view is that it's up to God, but we don't have, that's not independent of free will. So in that sense, you are creating it as well, but all the power is in his hands, not ours. And that's part of the submission.
Okay.
I also get a feeling of submission from what he says at the age of 50, sorry. Also, I would like to know if you have any idea when, like which phase of his life was Confucius in when he said this?
Okay, he was very successful at 50 years old. At 50 years old, he got the highest rank at the court. He took back a piece of land from an enemy kingdom in a very clever way. And he was going to destroy the aristocrats in the kingdom of Lu to restore the sovereign family of the kingdom of Lu. So 50 years old was a shining year for him.
But did he write that in his 50s or much later?
Oh, that he wrote that much later, and I would say that most of his personal musings, okay, I'm not speaking of the theories or of the teaching books for his disciples, but his personal reflection on life and so on has been done in the last 5 years of his life, between 67 years old and 72 years old. He died at 72.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the overarching question you're poking at is like, how do we come to an idea of what the will of heaven is? Like, how do you know that?
In a way, Confucius is saying that you cannot know that until you're old enough, until you have experienced the world enough.
or mature enough. Okay,
Correct.
as one of our friends said maybe 10 minutes ago, these ages are not absolute. Okay, it reflects the level of maturity. Okay, so we can imagine that someone truly exceptional would have the level of maturity of 50 at 32, for example.
If he didn't know, then how could he take his stand at 30? Like, what stand is it? Completely illusionary stand then?
Some person, I would say that we have here the typical human development of an aristocrat of 6th century BC. Okay, but maybe in certain society there is no need to have a social stand or a social stand phase that is so developed. Okay, but once again,
but I mean from his quote, because taking it as a, it doesn't have to be at 30, but as a stages thing, even before he's reached the maturity or understands the will of heaven, he's still
yes,
taking a stand. What is he standing on then if he has no knowledge of capital K knowledge?
yes, but it depends of his endeavor. It could be something social, it could be something scientific, it could be poetry, it could be music, meaning something that you accomplish that would be recognized by your society at the time.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a stand against something, it's a standing in society.
Mm. I guess
sorry, go Matthew.
Go,
yeah,
Matthew.
I was gonna say, like, the in thinking about how the form of an idea often takes as it evolves within my own mind from conception to working out, really, and let's say I in my world I write a lot, so I tend to think of that as being like, okay, I've composed now a written form, but from the point that it didn't exist as an idea to it being an expression of something I've put out there into the world. For a certain period, there's a lot of intuition at the beginning, right? I don't really have full knowledge that this concept is true, but I'm intuiting that it is based upon a whole series of internal factors that I'm following, I'm following my nose on as I continuously work things out intellectually to see if that is true, or sometimes it's not, and you have to throw it away and try to come up with a new idea. So I think that, yeah, if that is, like, in my mind, a small microcosm of what is going on between the age of 15 and 30, I could see sort of somebody coming to sort of intuitive convictions to the point that they can feel like they can move on it, but they're still not totally stable. They're still not totally firm. And if somebody really smart were to probe them in a dialogue or something critically, they may not be able to defend their stance. Even if their stance was right, they might still fail at logically justifying their position because it's not mature yet. So that's sort of what I was thinking when you guys were talking about that.
Okay,
that's perfect. That exactly covers my concerns, I think. Like the kind of knowing that is fully formed, I suppose, it still has to be quite a firm knowing, that intuition that Matt speaks about. Otherwise, you can't go anywhere.
Yes,
it's unripe, but it's still real. It's just not ripened.
I feel like everybody's throwing around the word mature, but we haven't really discussed what that even means, right? There's this far idea of like a distant heaven, but then in terms of, we're saying till we're mature, and but we're not mature enough. But it's like, well, what is the purpose? Like, what is the nature of this maturity? In relation to this idea of paradise, of heaven, that was, brought up right at the beginning.
Okay, I say it in French because I don't know how to say it in English. Deux morceaux de robot pour Assad. Thank you very much. We have to go back to the concept of heaven.
Okay, is this concept of heaven, is it, and like at the age of 50, does this become somehow internalized, that then its relationship with the soul maybe, or something like at 50, at that level of maturity or whatever, there's a recognition of something, much more more broader in scope, you know, that's, you know, that has a place within?
Definitely.
So what is is there any relationship or attachment between, say, the soul and heaven at 50, at that level of maturity?
Wow.
Is there any thought or?
Oh, there is a big part between the two. Okay,
Yeah.
meaning that heaven here have to be understood by as God, as the cosmic laws, as the supreme, as the nature with a capital N. Use the word as you like.
So does that tie back into what Dave was saying about maturity as well? That this idea of the mandate of heaven, or the idea of heaven, is important to shape our concept of maturity?
Yes. Wow. What is the ultimate purpose in life? Okay, let's not forget that at the stage of 40 years old, the guy was without no confusion. So he saw very clearly the line of boundary between the animal kingdom and the divine kingdom, excuse me, the transcendental kingdom. And at 50, he was capable to 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 see the will of heaven. Okay, so at 40, he was capable to understand that there is another dimension than the animal dimension, but he was going on a journey. And at 50, he understood the will of heaven, because not only he understand that there is a spiritual journey, but he was in deep intimacy with the soul dimension, with the true purpose in life.
Quan, could you tell us what the word for heaven is as used by Confucius?
It's Tian, Tian.
Tian.
Okay, so heaven, Tian in Chinese means the sky, the blue sky above our heads, of course. But heaven in Chinese philosophy, of course, it's not the sky. It's, I would say that if we have to use something very close in Christianity, it's God.
Yeah, because etymologically, heaven in English, it actually means home of God.
Exactly.
Comes from German.
But in German, Himmel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tian. Okay, so as Leinon just sent us the character for Tian.
In the chat.
That's why I started by the first quotation, invite you guys to exchange if Confucius is an atheist, an agnostic, or a theist. Okay, it's true that Confucianism is a philosophy. I agree with that. But one of the things that the West don't see very clearly, that to bring Confucianism is a religion, okay, with a god named Tian, heaven.
I think we distinguish between philosophies and religions on the basis of rituals. If there's a certain ritual prescribed by a certain philosophy, then it becomes a religion. Yeah.
But I would say that if you want to use a word that is not God, and if I have to translate heaven, or I have to translate Tian, I use a word to represent Tian, heaven, that is the closest to what I understand, and which is not God, that word would be truth.
So it's not as much of a personified God character as we tend to get in the Abrahamic faiths, but it is still, the Tian is still a unifying force, a transcendental unifying force that gives, I guess, meaning to existence.
It's not a force.
No.
It's not a force, because if it's a force, it would be chi, right? The force that permeates all the universe, visible and invisible, is chi. Heaven is truly the supreme principle, and it's not necessarily a deity, okay? Because in Chinese mythology or in Taoism, you have many deities that I would make equal or equivalent to angels, archangels, and so on. You know that in Christianity, you have a hierarchy of angels. You have the cherubims, the seraphims, throne, dominations, blah, blah, blah. So you have the equivalent in Chinese.
Somebody just said something?
Yeah, that person has been caught. At least I did not hear him.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the guy who said something, because it was a masculine voice, just repeat it, please. Okay, maybe later.
If we can go back to the religion thing, I think one of the confusions is there's a matter of, let's say, being loyal to only one that is also confusing, because it doesn't make any sense to be Muslim and Christian at the same time. That doesn't make sense. But you can, it seems in the Chinese idea, be Confucian and almost whatever at the same time.
Yes. I would say that the best way to get out of that dilemma is to use ancient Greek philosophy, okay? Because in Plato, when he speak about beauty, goodness, and truth, that truth is definitely heaven for me.
In Islam, we have the concept of God as the creator of both heavens and earth. And the word for heavens, as used in the Quran, is samawat. Samawat is akin to the word we have in English as the word sum, a combination, a sum of all things. So, but that is not God itself. That is a creation of God too.
Exactly. Here in Chinese, heaven has to be understood as the supreme and not the home of God.
Mm-hmm.
With no S.
So that's the distinction. In Christian and Islamic context, it's more like the abode of God or the home of God. But there in Chinese, it is God.
Exactly. And of course, the gods with an S, the angels, the archangel, the equivalent of the Chinese, the cherubim, seraphims, and so on, they live in heavens with an S, of course, okay? But it's not the same than heaven with no S.
You also mentioned, Quan, that even if you use capital N nature for Tien, which I have seen some translators use, that's okay. And that's an interesting thing to unpack in itself, because and it kind of covers the capital T truth, etc., that you're also alluding to, because it covers a whole lot of different things that are ultimately from principle, that is unified, that has a lot of tawhid in it.
Yes, the supreme principle or truth. I think that truth is the easiest word, and it has a meaning in the Western world when we say truth, because of Greek philosophy.
In the postmodern context, truth would not be understandable anymore. It wouldn't have the same meaning anymore.
you're right, Assad, in the postmodern environment, but I would take the risk to pass for a reactionary by saying the people saying that need to return to their spiritual and philosophical pathway.
Because they would say that there are many truths, not just one truth. There's no such thing as something true or one big truth. It's just
Yes, I would say that it's truly to debase philosophy and to think that anthropology is philosophy.
Mhm.
But I think that postmodernism, if I may say something about that, is a kind of imperialism of anthropology.
That's very interesting.
Meaning that they want so much to put to the forefront the different peculiarities of each culture rather than seeing what is universal in all human adventures.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like the idea of radical multiculturalism that's been promoted by a lot of these racist imperialists over the years, which on the surface seems nice, like, oh, you're just welcoming everybody and respecting everybody's views as being all equal. And here in Canada, you know, we have like a multicultural mosaic, so it's a very big part of the current dynamics shaping the Canadian society. But oh my God, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, you're by just saying everybody's because everybody's perspective and everybody's feelings are different, thus, and they're all true. They're all truly feelings associated with your perspective. Thus, they're all true equally, and thus there is no truth, right? You just create this homogenous blur of coexistence. Like in Canada, you know, a mosaic is everybody just lives talking to people who already think the way they think in their, you know, in their whatever ethnic circles or whatever. So you don't have a lot of universality. There's no commonality culturally that unites people, because it's all just like these little tiles on a picture. But it's very, very forced together, and it's not very organic.
Yeah, it's used to fragment people rather than invite them to participate in something universal that transcend all the peculiarities.
That's the result, but I don't think it's the intention. I mean, it's an understandable historical development, I think, from an overemphasis on, well, essentially a homogeneity of the only thing of what truth is. And that did tend to happen in well, I mean, first of all, in certain forms of Protestant Christianity, and then subsequently into modernity, where material reality is the thing that is ultimately the base of everything, and that's the only way you can accept it. So in response to that kind of imperialism, it makes sense to fragment, because it can't hold together. That's not strong enough principle to actually get to capital P principle.
That's a good point.
Okay, so I want to go to the sixth step, because that one is easier. They say that at 60, I'm capable to hear the will of heaven with no problem. Okay, so at 50, he was capable to understand the will of heaven, but still, he's not necessarily capable to live it every day easily. Okay, at 60, he's capable to hear the will of heaven easily, because it's became a second nature, if you want. And finally, at 70, I'm capable to follow the desire of my heart without overstepping the bounds, meaning that what he desires correspond exactly to the will of heaven, which is an even more advanced degree of personal refinement. Because the truly developed human being do not see the sun of truth. If you remember the myth of the cave in book 7 of Plato's Republic, at the end, he was not capable to look directly to the sun, right? Representing the supreme truth. But because there's no way to look at the sun, because you cannot see the sun, you can only become one with the sun, or you can only become one with the truth. Or I would say that in Christian terminology, you become one with God, and that's the final step of the human adventure.
Yeah, oneness with the divine being. It's a very important concept in Sufi Islam also, with their philosophy of Wahdatul Wujud, the unity of all existence. That's the underlying condition, as well as the ultimate destiny of all creation, to become one with their creator.
Exactly. And there you truly have a true unity. But of course, in that unity, you are no more, okay? Because the special form that has been given to you dissolve in the total.
So also in philosophy, you begin to you become a philosopher at 60, right?
More or less.
you, that's when you start to philosophize things. So,
well, at least according to Confucius, you're capable to hear the will of heaven without complaint. Because at 50, you began to understand the will of heaven,
mm-hmm.
but there are still complaints.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I was thinking a little bit about, because you brought up Plato's Republic, the character of Socrates frequently has this this goal in his dialogues to get one, especially comes out in the Phaedo, right, the day that he drinks the hemlock finally and dies. But there's this recurring theme that the purpose of a true philosopher's life is to free oneself from the shackles of the senses, so that you become, because the senses, whenever they're dominant or exerting an influence, are always keeping us away from the goal of a philosopher, which is to pursue wisdom. But the senses are always throwing us awry. So when you come to that place where you're, and Socrates is about 70, I think, when he's sitting on his deathbed, he's explaining why he is actually not sad, and all of his disciples are super sad, because he's like, well, this has been the purpose of my life. Now, as a true philosopher, should this not be also the purpose of your life, to be happy for the moment that the soul is freed from the shackles of the body? Because all our life as a philosopher, we're trying to do that, and to achieve satisfaction, a type of satisfaction which is beyond the realm of pleasure and pain. So we're always being modulated by pleasures and pains throughout our lives, but there's a satisfaction beyond those two, where we're never lacking, or we never have too little or too much of something. We're satisfied. And this idea that you're bringing up at the last stage of your life, when you're in harmony with the will of God, is it reminds me of that a little bit.
No, it's incredible. Sorry, please go on.
To bring that back to where we started, though, like there's a danger in that of leaving the animal behind, because the senses, that's where the animal specializes in. So how to integrate those without just kind of flying off, and I suppose that in that sense, the idea of dissolving at the end as well. That's a very, you lose personality, you lose your body, obviously, but you lose an identity as well. I think there's that dual danger, that dual kind of more Western Christian Greek aspect and the Confucian aspect. Whereas like in Islam, for example, you still have sex in heaven and you keep your personality. And you know, you're being served by beautiful boys and girls.
Yes.
And you can have wine, yeah. Christine said.
Yeah, that's right.
No, that's a good paradox too.
How can I convert to this?
I think a sense perception.
Well, this is
Wine until then, though.
This is also the Islamic view of heaven, not heaven as such, but of paradise, which is a different concept. But I'd rather interpret it through the lens of the New Testament, where Jesus he equates it with a grand feast where you have all your friends, and the parable of the groom there, and I don't have that completely in mind right now.
And the banquet, I think.
The banquet, yeah, the great banquet, yeah.
Like forever, like a banquet with all of your friends forever.
Imagine what you feel like when you
get tired of that
with you, and that's the feeling that you're gonna have.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's not a literal. Okay, I shouldn't take it literally, but it's more the joy of that camaraderie. Okay, I can get my mind around it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's quite similar in the Quran. I mean, they don't actually mention the sex in heaven. They do mention a lot of sitting around, passing around a cup with your mates.
Oh yeah, this says وَسَقَاهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ شَرَابًا طَهُورًا, and it will be God serving you the wine.
Ooh. You have to have a good tip there. How do you tip God?
Ask for more.
Okay, before I go to the Buddhist dimension of my presentation, what are the I would like to ask you guys what would be the three main characteristic of Confucianism? The three main.
Philosophy.
I'm sorry, can you repeat, please?
Philosophy.
Philosophy, okay,
Philosophy.
yes. Okay, understood as love of wisdom.
Maturity, growth.
Okay. Okay, so we have philosophy, growth.
Participation in civil affairs.
Interesting. Yes. And I thank you, Assad, for that very nice way to say things, because I would have said social hierarchy. Okay, but I think you said that in a nice way. Participation in civil affairs. Okay, because in the Confucian world, it's unforgivable not to participate in social life. Okay, you have to do what you can in your society, and it's very hierarchical. So I would agree that Confucianism, you have the dimension of investigation, of thinking, of wisdom, of personal endeavor, but you also have the social hierarchy aspect, as you guys know, Asian societies are very hierarchical societies, okay? You have the concept of face, which is a way to rank the person in that hierarchy, okay? So it's very important in Asia when you see someone that you try to put him somewhere in the social hierarchy, okay? So because everyone is expected to do something in that society. And I repeat what Assad said because I like very much his expression, participation in civil affairs.
Filial piety alongside with that.
Yes, yes. And I would say that the piety has to be lived in specific manners precisely in participating in civil society, because it has to be lived in that society and not in an abstract manner.
The hierarchy in the Chinese culture during Confucius' time, is it rigid, very rigid, or people are moving up and down through it?
I would say that for the upper nobility, it's very rigid. You have to be born in the upper nobility. For the small nobility, they are minor branches of the great families. And I would say that they would correspond more or less to the middle class nowadays. Okay, the upper nobility, the privilege of the upper nobility is to have domains, to have slaves, to have all kind of riches and wealth. The privilege of the small nobility is to get an education, to become officers at the court or in the army. So what is original in the case of Confucius, that he opened that education for commoners. Thing that a Confucius gave to Chinese society, that he gave that education to everyone and not only to the small nobles.
And the nobility, do they understand how they became nobles? By acquiring land, through conquest?
Yes, yes, of course, but they would rationalize it by saying that they are the offspring of gods, of angels. Okay, a little bit like Julius Caesar would say that his ancestor was the goddess Venus, for example. So the Chinese nobility had the same kind of justification of their privileges.
It's almost like an Indian caste system, which
yes, of course. But it was less rigid because a peasant, if he had special talents from Confucius' time, because the education was open to everyone, if that son of a peasant went to Confucius' school and was capable to perform, he was accepted in the small nobility. That's the root of the obsession of Asians to go to school and to succeed in school.
Is there a concept of revolution in Confucian philosophy?
There's a concept of changing of mandate. Okay, the mandate of heaven is given to a prince, and that prince has the duty to perform. Okay, and when a prince perform adequately, he would be capable to maintain order, peace, and give food and education to his people. Okay, if he failed to perform, which is to give peace, order, food, and education to his people, the people has the right to dethrone him and to replace him.
Not necessarily change the structure of the hierarchy, but to replace someone at the head.
Exactly. I would say that one of the distinction of traditional Chinese society, except for some very small experience, because those small experiences existed 22 centuries ago, or even 3,000 years ago, of small peasant communities who were self-governing, okay? But they were not capable to win over the feudal order.
Hey, Quan, could you, when you speak, would you be able to pull the mic a little bit further, away from your mouth, just because it is coming out a little staticky, sometimes loud. Sorry, overly loud. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
is it better now?
I think so.
Okay, perfect. I wouldn't hold it like this.
Need a little bit closer. Sorry.
Okay. Like this? Like this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
good.
perfect. Okay, perfect.
I was just thinking about Ben Franklin, because it makes a lot of sense that this idea is there in the Confucian worldview, because Ben Franklin, we published an article by this scholar named David Wang a little while ago on the Rising Tide site, and he went through the Confucian the Confucian connection to Benjamin Franklin, who was a student of, he loved Confucius's philosophy and made a lot of arguments to model American society that was in the 1740s, 50s, 60s, around a lot of Confucian principles, both in terms of theory as well as into practice. But the fact that he also led in the committee to draft the Declaration of Independence that mandated that society in law is morally obligated legally to overthrow a government that becomes prohibitive of the purpose of government that we constituted in a republic, to defend life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But that's unprecedented, that would become like formalized as the basis of a society. But there it was already for thousands of years in the Chinese world as a concept. No
Yes.
European monarch would ever accept that.
Yes, and that concept of the mandate of heaven has been invented about 1000 BC, because at the time the Shang dynasty, who ruled China for about 6th century, has been replaced by the Zhou dynasty, and the Zhou dynasty was still ruling at the time of Confucius, even if they were quite weak at the time of Confucius. And when the Zhou dynasty replaced the Shang dynasty around 1045 BC, they had to invent a concept to justify what would be perceived as treason at the time. Because before the invention of the mandate of heaven around 1045 BC, if you kill your prince or your sovereign, well, it's a treason. So one of the advisors invented that concept of mandate of heaven.
Lionel, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
It's also remarkable how long the mandate of heaven concept lasted, because when you go to Beijing and visit the Temple of Heaven, you learn a little bit of the history of it. Like, even after the monarchy fell, after the empire fell, one of the generals tried to do a ritual there to get the mandate. It didn't work, but people take it really, really seriously. It's not just some kind of airy concept.
Yes, and even the Chinese Communist Party is considered as having now the mandate of heaven, and they will keep on governing China as long as they're capable to perform according to the obligations of that mandate of heaven.
I've heard from a couple of Taoist masters that they look at the construction of Tiananmen Square and the placement of Mao's photo there and everything, and it's all very feng shui to try and secure that mandate. So all sorts of weird stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you know, the fact that Mao is facing south, you know that in Chinese tradition, only the sovereign faces south, okay? So Mao is the first sovereign of the Red Dynasty, having the mandate of heaven for now. And the Chinese know that that dynasty would be replaced one day. But the question is when, and no one is capable to answer that question for now.
But could it not theoretically also be the case that a society, that a mandate could be re-earned into perpetuality, so to speak, theoretically?
Well, theoretically, yes. If the dynasty is capable to rejuvenate itself, let's say each generations, or at least each 2-3 generations, in reality, it would be an incredible performance yet to be accomplished. Because even the longest dynasty in Chinese history is 8 centuries. 8 centuries is very long, but it's not eternity.
I remember Lin in a I forget which paper, but he made a point that struck me, which was that though it can be proven demonstrably that every individual is guaranteed to be mortal, it's not proven in a guaranteed way similarly that a society is mortal. A society has access to the potential of being immortal, though we haven't seen it yet. But
exactly,
there's no absolute finiteness of beginning and endness to a society as such, or civilization as such, in the same way that there is to an individual.
Yes, and a truly strong society would be capable to transform itself depending of the obligation of each phase of its development. And if we want to make a parallel with the personal development, the ultimate aim of any society would be the creation of heaven on earth, which is the end stage of the development of that society, or any society capable enough to bring people to that end stage.
So you would say,
if I could bring my objection to that again, except this from the Buddhist perspective, anything that is born must die, and that's a metaphysic that's very difficult to get around.
Very deep.
Jump in for just a second too, and ask you, would you say that the age of reason concept is sort of what you're talking about as well, to make heaven on earth, as in this goal of an age of reason, an age governed by reason?
Yes, well, in the book, in the one of the classics of Confucianism called Chong Yong, you have 4 obligation of the gentleman. Okay, the gentleman has 4 basic obligation. One is xiu sheng, which is cultivate yourself. After that is qi jia, meaning to put order in your family. After that is chu guo, meaning governing the state. And finally, ping tianxia, meaning bring peace to the world. So those are the 4 basic obligations of every Confucian gentleman. Of course, not all Confucian gentlemen would be capable to go through the 4. But if you're not capable to go through the 4, at least cultivate yourself, which is the first one, xiu sheng.
It's like the code of Confucian chivalry.
Yes, exactly. So if you're capable to accomplish the 4 stages, excellent. But if not, at least the first one.
Yeah, and it will still be beneficial.
Exactly. At least you won't be a pain in the ass for the others.
And what happens if you try and do the later stages without doing the earlier stages? What would Confucius say about that?
Excuse me, can you repeat, please? I did not hear you.
If you try and do the later stages without doing the early stages, getting your foundations right, what would Confucius say would happen?
Oh, he would say that to be courageous without learning is a true danger for yourself and for others.
Yeah, courage only makes sense in when you can feel the fear in a situation. Only then courage makes sense. Otherwise, it's just the foolishness.
Yes.
Sounds very Jordan Peterson-ish, actually. Clean up your room.
Oh, yes, 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 yeah. I like that. Clean up your room. It's a very short way to express the same thing.
Right. That's the first mandate, right? That he's dealing with, or the first level of the four, is what Peterson's dealing with the clean up your room idea.
But he doesn't go as far as Confucius.
No, he doesn't. No.
Okay, I would like to.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, go
What's
please.
there in the society? Sorry, what is there in the society that kind of encourages, you know, the person to achieve these four like mandates? You know, like is there, like for example, in Christianity we have our church, we go to mass, or in Islam they have their mosque, and in Judaism they have their synagogue or whatever. So we have this, but what do they have in Confucianism to help people through these, build on, you know, their stages of growth?
Okay, so you have to study the classics, and you have to practice meditation, because meditation is not only a Buddhist thing but a Confucian thing. To master the mind, because meditation is is an instrument to master the mind, because as you know, the mind is a good servant but a very bad master. So awareness has to be present, and you have to be surrounded by good friends, of course. So
I think
not
another aspect, in contrast to those three, and I think this is true in paganisms in general. I mean, you could class Confucianism and Taoism as a kind of Chinese paganism. Shame is very important.
yes.
So being controlled and controlling others in the good way, hopefully through shame.
Yes. Yeah, shame being the feeling that you are not up to what is offered as the ideal.
Oh, is this potentially something more connected to humility at all? Or is this something different from humility? Huh?
Well, as in any society, there is an ideal that is offered, and I would say that Asian parents are quite good to brainwash their children into that ideal. Okay, so shame is the feeling that you have when you think that you're not up to that ideal.
And kind of representing your peoples. I mean, this is a very important aspect that it's very difficult to understand in a modern multicultural society. You don't want to shame your peoples and your ancestry. Yeah, I think that's in Islam as well, but that's why lineage is so important.
Yes, I like that point very much, okay? Because yes, even in modern Asian minds, they still live with the idea that they have to honor the ancestral line, and that they have to not to bring shame and dishonor to them. Yes.
Because they will haunt you.
Yes, or even in an abstract sense, that you have to bring something to honor your family line. Yes.
Yes. Honor thy father and mother, kind of.
Yes, it's part of the Eastern Asian brainwashing. That's definitely the case. And it stemmed from Confucianism, that's for sure.
But I guess there's something, I mean, because it's one of these double-edged swords, right? Where you're walking a bit of a fine line, where you could see that obviously shame, at least in the sense that I'm used to encountering it, is usually not a very good component to proper intention or motives or passions in life. But it could be. Like, I mean, at the same time, it partakes in things that are tied to the conscience, that are tied to, like, positive obligations, which can take you into you know, like if you're always thinking, if the idea of your ancestors is a strong sense in your heart of like how you morally judge what you will do from moment to moment, then that's great. It's like an enhancer of your conscience.
Yes.
If it's done just out of a pure obligation, devoid of conscience, but you're just like, it could be kind of self-destructive too.
What if your ancestors had bad conduct, and you shouldn't model that?
That's a really important aspect. I find that that's where Jordan Peterson actually helps Confucians a heck of a lot, because part of the way that you honor your ancestors is by redeeming them, is by saving your father from the belly of the whale. And that helps a lot of the unfortunate brainwashing that Asians get these days, because you can transcend their problems without abandoning them.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. And I would say that another nice word to use rather than shame would be honor. Okay, and let's not forget that all these things stem from Confucius, and Confucius was a noble man. So it's a very aristocratic ethics or code of conduct.
With honor, of course, there's the other side of the coin, where you're killing others for honor, for your honor, which doesn't make much sense, because what I realized was that it's good to die for your honor, but whenever you're killing someone else for your honor, to save your honor, it all falls apart. It doesn't make any sense.
That's why honor without learning is a danger for yourself and for others. The key word in Confucianism is always learning.
And I think honor and shame, they're really important to understand. They're not individualistic concepts. If you try and make them modern individualist, it definitely goes wrong. They are definitely collective ideas that you have to understand in the collective context. So they are for your peoples. Well, what exactly that means, where you belong as a peoples, without excluding others.
Exactly. I would like to mention two concepts that is absolutely key to Confucianism, and I don't want to forget it. So that's why I jump in now. Okay, you all know that the Chinese or the Eastern Asian have the concept of faith, right? Okay, I think that the Western word that is exactly equivalent to faith is honor. Okay, but there are two faces. Okay, not one, two. One of the face is called in Chinese mianzi, okay, and the other one is called lian. Okay, mianzi is related to your social status, your wealth, your rank in society, your connections, etc. And I would say that, as our friend in Australia said, Lionel, that's the more, it's personal, but it's also a family honor. Okay, so you have a social status, it's for you, of course, but it has a consequence on your family. Okay, and the other phase is lian. Lian is more the personal reputation. Are you a sincere person? Are you a reliable person? Are you a good friend? Do you lie, or you always stick to the truth? Okay, is your intention not to hurt people? Okay, that phase called lian in Chinese is more the phase of personal reputation, of someone going on the journey of spirituality. It's more personal than mianzi, even if mianzi has a personal dimension and a family dimension. And lian is much more personal in the Western sense.
One aspect of faith to emphasize probably also is the manners side, and the etiquette, and I like the word in Chinese for etiquette is literally it's like the adornment of principle. So it really high manners, like even in Kung Fu, it's considered Kung Fu, the essence of it is really good manners. You can defeat people with really good manners. And it's something to do with the fact that it reflects how strongly your own virtue is able to be manifest without blowing people away, I guess, with truth, for example.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
And before I close the part on Confucianism, there is an excellent movie on Confucius by director Hu Mei. Hu is her family name. Mei, Mei is her personal name, her first name. And it has been produced in 2010, and you can get it for free on the internet. Confucius by Hu Mei. It lasts 2 hours. And if you never saw a movie on Confucius, definitely that one has to be watched.
I was going to ask you another question that where the conversation's kind of going is the notion of family itself. Is it based? Did Confucius play a big role in promoting the notion of family? And then, because with the honor and the ancestors, you know, how did Confucius? Did he consider it an institution of a more advanced society? And did he promote that, the idea of honor?
Oh yes, yes. I would say that the family is one of the key concepts of Chinese society, Eastern Asian society, and it has been promoted by Confucius. Because once again, uh, in the family you have, let's not forget the four obligations of the gentleman, of the Confucian gentleman: to cultivate oneself, to put order in your family, to rule the state, and to bring peace to the world. So definitely the family is one of the microcosm where you will exert yourself and prove your mettle before you go to the state, and before you will bring peace to the world for the most outstanding of the gentlemen, of course.
Hmm. And and so this idea of honoring your ancestors, I mean, also, so is there prayer to the ancestors? As far as I understood, there's like in Japanese society, or is it Shinto or whatever, that the ancestors take a primary role in the role of prayers and reverence and that sort of thing. Is that similar in Confucianism? Is that?
Oh, it's exactly the same, because the ancestors are spirits who live in heaven with God, or with heaven, if you want, with a capital H. So they are there and they witness our behaviors for those who truly believe in the traditional beliefs. And for those who don't believe in the traditional beliefs, it's still the idea of honor. Okay, because even if you don't believe in ghosts and spirits and so on, but you can still be inspired by the idea of your ancestors that you have to honor, because you're at the end line of a very long line, going to 2, 3, 4, 5 century, or even 2,000 years, or 25,000 century, because we know the offspring of Confucius. They are in flesh nowadays, and they are at the 82nd generation now. And it's not only the only family in China that can trace their ancestry back to 25 centuries, because Confucius himself come from a family which is a minor branch of the Duke of Song, and the Duke of Song themselves are a minor branch of the King of Shang. So the King of Shang started to rule China from 1600 BC. So it means that the family line of Confucius is almost 4,000 years old.
That's cool. Just quick, Cynthia did post the link to the movie that Quan referenced in the chat group, so that's just something to keep in mind that it's there.
And last question is, so are the ancestors then also considered a gateway to mediation for like the spiritual realm, or, you know, divine or the cosmic world or what have you, or and to God itself? Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I have
Yeah.
to give a Christian equivalent of the ancestors, imagine them as angels.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Right. So, and so in the truer higher meaning is honor thy father and mother, is the spiritual meaning in that sense.
Oh, absolutely. It has to be spiritual in heaven, and it has a link on earth also, of course.
Wonderful. We've kind of lost that aspect in Christianity. I think it's there, but I think we've lost that conception of it, of our spirituality, which is needing more reform, I think.
Yeah, or simply rejuvenate, because the concept is already there.
Yeah, yeah.
Quan, what do you think about the youth in Hong Kong who were involved in the protests against Chinese mainland? Do they understand these values to some extent? Incorporate these values?
Uh, they do understand these values, but they perceive mainland China as the devil, who and the Red Dynasty in Beijing as usurpers.
Quan, are you noticing also in your communities a big split? Like, are young people more on the Hong Kong side if they're interested, and the older people kind of saying, "Oh, the young people don't know what they're doing"? Because that's certainly what we're seeing here in the Australian diaspora. And yeah, they're not seeing eye to eye at all, or even able to come to any conversation.
Yeah, but I have to be honest. Okay, Hong Kong is a strong place for Chinese traditional culture. Okay, so for a well-educated person in Hong Kong, what I'm saying here this afternoon, there's nothing new or special for him.
So does Confucianism have like a devil, you know, concept of devil or evil or something, that their destiny to head toward heaven is going to be compromised if they don't follow a good path?
Yeah, there are all kind of minor demons in Confucianism, but I would say nothing that would be the equivalent of the devil with a capital D in Christianity.
Okay.
There can be strong bad or evil spirits, but nothing truly equivalent to the devil, once again with the capital D.
No main antagonist.
No main antagonist. I would say that there is maybe a slight imbalance in Chinese culture, in the sense that they truly believe that the forces of good are truly dominant on the forces of evil, even if evil exists, of course, in Chinese culture.
Quan,
Yes, Matthew. Yes.
on that note, will you be discussing today, or leave it for the future, the yin yang concept of balance of good and evil as equal balanced, or as one as being asymmetrical, like, you know, more as you just said, the good being more powerful than the evil? Or is that something you're going to touch on today, or no?
I would say that I wouldn't say something very quick on that today, okay? Because I realized that we took 2 hours on Confucianism, and I did not talk at all about Buddhism and Taoism, but I let the flow, I let things flow naturally. It's okay for me. But just to go back to the symbol of the yin yang, okay? Let's not forget that the absolute symbol is the circle, okay? And that circle is the supreme representation of order, harmony. So once again, there's a slight imbalance for the forces of good.
Because there's no opposite to the circle. Like, there's no anti-circle. The circle is okay.
And that circle is truly the representation of the ultimate of heaven.
Interesting idea.
So you could see you mean to say, so like the yin and yang that we see would be a projection of maybe of the conic section where the emanation of the circle and it's coming from a center, it's from a unity, projecting, and we're just seeing like a cross section of the elements. Would that be a conception of the symbol?
Yeah, well, the circle is truly the symbol of perfection, okay? The center of the circle is at equal distance of every point on the circle, okay? So it's a perfect symbol for the harmonious relation of the center and the periphery being all phenomena, sorry.
Lionel just put out a little quote from Zhu Xi, which is, it's an interesting quote touching on this whole line of discussion. Lionel, I don't know, do you want to just read it out loud, Lionel? No, I can't hear. Your mic is, you're on mute.
There is no other event in the universe except yin and yang overcoming each other in an unceasing cycle. This is called change, the same change of the Yijing. However, for the movement and stillness, there must be principle that makes them possible. This is the Taiji, or the differentiated one.
No, Zhu Xi, the Confucian.
Could you say more?
Yeah,
on
Zhu Xi is a Neo-Confucian, so he brought together, he was the propounder of Neo-Confucianism, which tried to integrate Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, but mostly under Confucianism.
Yes, and Zhu Xi, for those who don't know him, he lived in the 12th century, and what we know as Confucianism nowadays is essentially from him. In the 18th century, there has a group of philosophers called Han Shui, who try to go back to the original text of Confucius of the 5th century BC, of the 6th century BC, sorry.
A revival, I guess.
Exactly.
Could you discuss, since you were even saying when you were reading the quote, the Chinese name, that was used, or the Chinese word for change and the Chinese word for differentiated one. Could you maybe just elaborate more on what he's discussing in that quote? Either Quan or Lionel?
Lionel, please go.
Well, the Yijing is one of the books that you're supposed to study that Confucius did. He did a very important commentary on. And these days, amongst New Age circles, it's mostly known for its divination. But I think the idea of the 64 hexagrams is that they kind of like, it's a way to understand how manifestation progresses from one state to another. And I think a parallel would be just, the kind of the Western idea that, you must have an unmoved mover. You can't have just change being everything like Heraclitus inferred. You have to have something that's still for movement to even make sense. Just having unceasing movement, that the metaphysics are wrong. So that's why the Yijing relates to the differentiated one. As far as the differentiated one is concerned, there is this idea of a primordial one, which is like a wonton or a huntun, and that's kind of a big mash. The yin yang hasn't formed yet. Taiji is more okay. It's still one, but Taiji is discernible.
I have another question. If yin and yang are supposed to always be overcoming each other in an unceasing cycle, how do you get paradise on earth?
Well, I mean, I don't agree
Or
that you can, but I'm Muslim. But I'm Muslim, so I'm biased.
Okay. Quan, how do you, or do you disagree with the yin and yang? Does Quan agree with the yin and yang?
Well, you don't have to see it as a battle. It's rather a dance.
Because it's like part of the like even with one's development, you have a yin and yang conflict within yourself and with others in order to progress. Like it's like the struggle or whatnot.
Well, precisely, I put in question the notion of struggle. I prefer to say dance. Once again, it's not a struggle.
Yes.
The best struggles are dances, though.
Yeah. Well, you can have conflictual moments, okay? But conflictual moments don't mean that the center of the relation is conflictual, okay? It's like in a couple of human, if you would husband, you can have conflictual moments, but if it's a true couple and the two stay together for good reasons, well, the relation is not essentially a conflict but a dance.
And that's what Georgie emphasizes the differentiated one. Like there is an unmoved thing that is accessible all the time, like a perfect serenity, essentially, I guess you could say. No matter how bad the battle or the conflict or the dance or whatever gets, that stillness is always there, always. And that's kind of where Confucianism is very much in line with Islam in terms of, okay, there's no devil, but in Islam there is shaitan, but shaitan is like almost powerless compared to Allah. Allah can, shaitan only ever does anything by Allah's allowance or part of his grand plan, I guess.
Is this, you said it's shaitan? How do you pronounce
shaitan,
that?
Yes.
Is this sort of like an angel that's fallen or an angel gone awry, or what is this concept?
A jinn or an angel, yes. He
Okay.
refused to bow to Adam when Allah commanded him to.
Okay.
Because Adam's just made of earth, I'm made of fire, what are you talking about? And so
Lucifer.
But I wanted to ask, you said that there is no main antagonist like a devil or shaitan in Confucianism, and then where does this this almost dualistic view of this dance comes from?
Very interesting question, and you are at the heart of the two main schools of Confucianism. Confucius and his direct disciples think that man is born good and sees the fire of goodness in us. Okay, so the struggle is either you work increase the goodness in us, or you're just lazy and you don't do anything. Okay, so I would say that laziness or ignorance is the equivalent devil according to Confucius. The other school, which is a minor school compared to the Confucian main interpretation, come from a philosopher called Sun Tzu. And what is quite amusing is that the student of that Sun Tzu was the main advisor to the first emperor. And that Sun Tzu think that men are born bad, and you have to educate them to get rid of the bad. Okay, so the struggle is inside the soul of man and not anywhere else in Confucianism.
It's almost like an equivalent of the original sin.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's very interesting. Yes.
And so similar to the fall, the idea of the fall. So once we've fallen, we become sinful. Like we have to overcome this in the West. Overcome this battle or this dynamic that's happened because we have fallen. But also the notion too, though, is that we've made the choice to fall, to learn through the falling to aspire up to be, to reunite with God. But the only way to so is it similar? It's similar in that. So he's taken the same kind of position of the internal dynamic of the soul. And so then there's this idea of a similar perfectibility of the soul, that the soul is changeable and can be enhanced and and made lighter and lighter. I don't know, just improve, more godlike.
Closer to heaven.
Right, and being able to abide in heaven willingly. Right, to be compatible in heaven almost. Right.
Yeah, I like the word compatible, because if you're not pure enough, you're not even capable to go through the threshold of heaven.
Right.
Oh, good point.
Well, I didn't know, this is interesting to know about the lineage and the various schools of Confucianism, because I'd like to know more about that as well. That sounds interesting. And the I Ching.
Okay, I would like to suggest a book that, rather than to give a long list of books, I prefer to suggest the one I liked about Confucius. And the book has been written in 2004 by An Ping Chin, An Ping, Annping, Chin, Chin. And the title of the book is The Authentic Confucius, A Life of Thought and Politics.
If you send that to me, I can email it out to everybody on the mailing list, Quan.
No problem. I do it after.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's fabulous. So there's always all sorts of questions that get generated in terms of the influence. Maybe you've covered some of it, but it just keeps generating more. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So, like, to carry, I'm thinking of the Tang Dynasty and its effect in the Khazaria that Matt covered, and the spiritual philosophic fertilization, cross fertilization. This is very fascinating, and again, why this. This history of reviving this and is because it itself could be a Renaissancean period of time, which it sounds to be, and so it's I don't know, it's fascinating. It opens up, and we need to uncover this and revisit it and look at it and re-examine it, I think, for a revitalization of spirituality and philosophy to meet for a higher level society where the moral development can match. We can only create the goals we'd like to through some of these teachings and understandings, I think, and then to practice them, as best
Yes,
we can.
practice them.
Yeah,
Yes.
practice them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a restoration of philosophy is definitely a must to counter the madness of postmodernism. That's for sure.
Right. Yes.
A certain understanding of what philosophy means, though, I would say, is what it directly led to postmodernism, because kind of too much of a head relation as opposed to, like, okay, so we practice, but are we living? Because even practicing is not quite living.
Oh, that's definitely sure. But I'm speaking from the standpoint of philosopher of ancient times, Eastern or Western. And when you say philosopher of ancient times, they always live their philosophy.
Yeah.
Philosopher is not necessarily a sophist.
Exact.
Right. Well, it's the love of wisdom. It's not somebody who professes wisdom. It's somebody who actually loves the wisdom, which means you walk the walk. You don't just say that you're wise.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you can love it and still not actually do anything.
No, because love is not just a passive thing. Love is an active principle. So that means you can't just you can't dichotomize it into a static world and an active world. It's like if I say that I love you as another human being, and you're being victimized or something in front of me, and I just say that I love you, but I'm gonna keep on letting you be victimized. Does that really show that I love you? No, I gotta actually get in there and protect you.
I understand, but I guess to use a perfect example, as the poem that I sent to you before, you love me and you work to protect me, but you still don't understand me. And that's a very different thing. Like to really go beyond your perspective to see how I'm another and to really see that and love that other. That's different to not quite seeing that, but throwing love at me anyway and protecting me, but maybe not protecting me in a way that I would actually like and would most benefit from. That's probably a core problem of philosophy detached from the heart, I would say.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, philosophy is detached from the heart. Yeah, that's a problem.
I would say that's a major topics for next time where we discuss Buddhism.
So when should we do that? Because I realize that now we're coming to a place of 2 hours, and obviously we can keep talking, but I'd imagine that it would be a smart idea perhaps next week or the week afterwards between our Sunday lectures to perhaps continue this discussion on a weekday. We can maybe discuss doing that to deal with Buddhism and Taoism and continue this discussion. Would that be okay with you, Quan?
Yeah, cool. Just send me a message just to be sure on the date. I would be willing to do that.
Okay. I don't want to derail the conversation. I mean, obviously this is fruitful, so certainly.
No, that's a good idea because, well, I would say that essentially I gave the content that I wanted to give about Confucianism this evening, and I want to say I'm very happy that the conversation is quite interactive, as I hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Quan.
What one question of one element that might be missing, but is the notion of karma.
Yes.
So does Confucius have a notion of karma? And is that okay? Go on.
Sorry. Keep on, please.
Well, I was just wondering if that is the notion. Like we talk about evil, like this notion of evil, that it's an objective evil out there. What if the evil is what we create through our actions? It's kind of like a reverberation of energy that then comes back to haunt us because we set an energy in motion, which is the notion of karma. Because the same with karma is be careful what you do and whatnot, because you're doing stuff and it creates an energy, so on. So maybe our conception of what evil is needs to be, modified to, because maybe, we're creating it through wrong action, but then we can learn from our wrong action, and how do we do that? But so I was wondering if Confucius had a notion of this, and if he said something about it and had practice to reduce it or whatnot.
I would say that he did not have a very clear concept of karma that has been explained in detail in Buddhism, but he gave many recommendations and precepts concerning the good behavior. In that sense, he was very proactive to nourish, to feed good karma, if you want, even if he did not
Here's the door.
theorize the concept of karma as has been done in a very elaborate manner in Buddhism.
Yeah. So he's that.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Well, it sounds like he's just focusing on the positive. Don't talk about the negative. Encourage the negative. Although, and so then there's kind of an implied notion of a karma, but through right action.
Yes. Right. If you want to use a modern concept for karma, I would use the word habits. Okay.
Okay.
In Confucian school, one of the core tenets of Confucian education is to develop good habits, good karma, if you want. Because as you know, karma is a Sanskrit word meaning action. Okay, so at the core of Confucian education, the children are trained to develop good habits, good behaviors.
I guess then the question is just like, oh, sorry, Kathleen. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just wondering what the consequence of bad behavior would be. Like in Christianity, of course, we have this concept of sin, and I think in our society, talking about postmodernism and all this kind of thing, it's sort of a detachment from a sort of pyramid where there's theology on the top and philosophy underneath that, and then you have the sciences, and so we've detached the sciences from the philosophy and the theology. But I'm just wondering, in terms of Confucianism, what is the consequence for say sin, something wrong, something that is intrinsically like wrong? You stole $100 million from somewhere or somewhere, I mean, I should give a better example, but to do wrong, to so what would the consequence of that be? Like, does the person carry that consequence, or does it become a societal consequence? Can it be cleansed or removed, this obstacle to spiritual growth or whatever,
Yeah. At the time of Confucius, people had a kind of popular religion, and that popular religion, you have a hell where people are punished, and you have a paradise where people are rewarded. Okay, so on a very basic level, you have consequences in the afterlife because they were folk beliefs about hell and heavens and things like that. And of course, on a social level, if the thief is caught, of course there are social consequences, of course. But once again, for the gentleman, the consequence is rather at the level of his soul. Okay, but if he's a true gentleman, I cannot imagine him stealing something. Okay, or he's not a true gentleman. That's all.
Yeah.
this idea of habits and karma, I like that concept. I've never heard that before, but it's and sin, right? Like, but as a new approach to the concept, it's true. Like if you think about habits from the standpoint of originating from a choice you made to give in or to be overcome by something that would make your soul unhealthier, but you made the choice to do it because whatever, it was pleasant at the time, there was a momentary gratification and you did it. It becomes more the potential to have more such succumb in the future to similar situations increases and is enhanced based on that first decision and the second decision. And your ability, so you're creating a bad habit and it becomes an addiction, versus the choice to stop that, to break that cycle and to create good habits instead, is again a choice that then creates, that can put you on a new path as well, which your soul becomes healthier and healthier. And so there's
exactly
this karma that you could say in a sense follows by virtue of paying consequences for giving into short-term pleasures without a sense of the longer-term consequences on yourself and on others and whatever else you want to. So yeah, that's interesting.
And those consequences probably carry ancestrally as well. I mean, we are the result of the good choices and bad choices and good habits and bad habits of our parents and so on. And we will, our kids will reap the rewards for our good choices, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And there is a short quotation from Confucius that I don't remember the chapter, but it says that at birth, most people are alike, but what will make them different is their education. Okay, so once again, the obsession with education, habits. Okay, because education, what is education after all? At the primary level, at the most elementary level, education is training to have a certain numbers of good habits.
That's where I agree with the problem with the modern Asian brainwashing, though, because I guess we're a homeschool family, and so what education and training and what it implies in terms of imposing forms as opposed to maybe more the Charlotte Mason approach of seeing individuals as persons already, and your job to train, so to speak, is actually to sculpt the form that's already there, to just bring it out and crystallize it. And I think that's where more Confucianism is as well, as opposed to modern ideas.
Yes. And for very elementary things, for example, it's a good habit to learn how to read, for example, okay? You have to be trained for that.
We were, we have a small side study group, and we've been reading periodically some of the writings of Helen Keller, and it directly addresses this in a really interesting way, because the young girl was writing this when she was maybe 19. She lost her sense of hearing and sight when she was maybe 12 months old. And so she only had 3 senses, and they were the lower senses to work with as she developed concepts which you would think were almost impossible to develop with only those 3 senses, smelling, taste, touch. And the quality of her insights into universal principles, into philosophy, and she spoke several languages, wrote several books, poetry, metaphor. I mean, she made the point that she was living proof that the behaviorist school of B.F. Skinner, Pavlov, that was very dominant in shaping educational theories, she refuted that by her very existence. It should be the point that nobody put these thoughts of sunlight, of color into me. I have concepts of a red rose, of a yellow sunset, but they were not put into me. They were awoken from within me because I have a power of poetry. She describes metaphor and how she wields it to understand metaphorical concepts from one sense into concrete ideas of things that she doesn't have sensual experience of, but they're very obviously true. So yeah, this idea that you can get the habit by behaviorists getting the effect, but without a free will, without anything internally driven, the way Lionel, you were talking about with your homeschooling experience with your children. You want to awaken that within them. A lot of you could get it that way, or you can actually do it the proper way and actually treat them like they're a human being that have all of these potentials that they have to activate on their own through discoveries and choices that they make.
I'd like to offer a criticism of habits, which I did on Aristotle's suggestion of developing good habits, because his conception of habits was more of a mechanical approach, where you habits so that you are programmed in a way to always do those kind of things without much mental or intellectual exercise. So habit, like, also there's this notion also that all habits are bad because they do not involve a conscious exercise. That's when it becomes a habit other than a conscious act.
We become robots, you mean?
Wait, but are you saying all habits are bad? Is that what you're saying, or is that?
Yeah, that's what I came across, and I formulated that I try to just quash all habits as bad, because it is kind of a mechanical approach towards living a life, which is, you're just developing some habits and then you're good to go because you're doing it habitually. It's just like you're not paying much attention to it anymore. On the other hand, there's this approach that what you're doing or even cultivating as a habit has a conscious, intentional element to it each time you're doing it. And that's where it's not a habit as such anymore.
That's where the talk about forms comes in handy, because if there's something inherent within you, it doesn't have to be a habit for you to do it. It more arises naturally. That's kind of more the Taoist idea as well. So it doesn't have to be a mechanization of things. It's just more a clarification of who you actually are. And let's say the will of heaven, what Allah wants you to do. That's not something that you have to begin at the very scratch every single time. It's just that as you go on, you're clearer and clearer of what is required in every situation. That's not, and so that is a kind of habit, because that, in a sense, you have to be trained to understand who you are. But your actions should ultimately arise from a perfect understanding of who you are.
Dave, you were gonna say something?
I was just gonna say I've thought about this question of habits, and in a certain sense, it's a question of economy. Like you will work on having certain habits, because when things become second nature, it's easier for you to do them, and it frees you up to do other things. And I was just thinking about it even in terms of work. Like the more you get used to something, the less you have to think about it, the more it's second nature, the more efficient you become in doing it. Obviously, when you're engaged in like creative work where you're doing something that you've never done before, there's no habit there. But habit, biologically, to a certain extent, you want to have good habits in order to help you perform these other tasks that can't perform through habit, that you need, that you must will consciously. But I mean, habits are not bad. I think you want to have good habits, right? We all want to have. It's going to free us up to think.
Well,
think about walking every time you walk, every step you take. For some people, it's not obvious, right?
Right.
People have trouble walking. It's a habit they have to learn again. Your body does all sorts of things without you having to think about it, like breathing.
Or talking.
Learning to breathe is itself something that, we often we have to learn later in life even.
What if something unexpected happens while you're on your course of habits or habitual?
You can't be a slave. You still have to be able to think for yourself. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to think about every step you take. You'll probably trip and kill yourself if you do.
How would like in sports, or the military, riding a horse, being a jouster or a bowsman. I mean, they get to the level, or a hunter, they get to the level of thinking of what they're doing and not as much of what it is they're doing step by step. They wouldn't be able to do the action or accomplish the goal if they had to do that. And I would say, so then there's a skip, I'd say, between the habit is the form, maybe, you know, of the procedure. It mimics what is actually then takes root, which is kind of, maybe you could say, the life of the thing, life of the action, life of the doing, which is transcends the physicality of it. You know, like a pitcher throwing a curveball, you know, on 3 and 2 to strike the guy out. He's not thinking of exact, he's just thinking of where he wants to place the pitch and start it off and where he wants it to end up. If he had to think of all the minute details of throwing that pitch, he'd never make the pitch.
No, but that's where thought and action must be synchronized in such a way that you're not dissecting the whole thing. It is a simultaneous action where simultaneous intention is also taking place. And like we're here in the Western world, we walk on the right side of the street. But if I go to a different country, the rule is the opposite. And if I have the habit of always walking on the right side, then I will be in trouble there for some time until I develop the habit of following their customs.
True. Right. That's a good example of, yes, cultural stuff and right. Yeah. And could you say then in a similar way that through habit, say in, you know, like a new habit of walking on the other side of the street or doing that new custom, but then to be really ingrained, to be really understood as something valid, then does not it have to take on what you might say a living form within the person, like a living understanding, so they no longer think in terms of, oh, I've got to, you know, not do what I normally would do, interrupt that pattern, but actually go to the thing, to the new behavior, the new understanding willingly, like as a new conception of how that reality is.
So the habit in that sense would be accepting the social norm and respecting it.
Yes, like the habit would lead into a larger understanding so that it becomes natural or, you know, more objective, like objectively true, or you know, for that person, subjectively true. Like it, in other words, it wouldn't be a reaction, it would be a action. And you know, and so maybe the habits are this, you know, I mean, I tend to think that the habits are just, you know, we need something to help bridge the gap and help maybe you know, do something whereby we discover something through
it's like water, from heaven flowing to heaven rising.
And maybe this is what I don't know, but you know, this the aesthetic state that Schiller's talking about is because I find that really fascinating. What he might be talking about somehow. To, you know, I really love his ideas of it creating, you know, so I won't go into that much, but it sparks that kind of thing too, that ideas of it. But I see I agree with your criticism, habits being the end all be all. I think Aristotle's I find that, for example, that's my criticism of church, modern church. In a lot of cases, going to church it's just a lot of motions, going through the motions, and people, it's become habit. They don't know what these various things might represent and really have meaning. So they're just going through the motions. It's kind of like, it's not bad, it's just missing out. It's just a shame. It's kind of a tragedy to experience a higher understanding than, higher experience. And so I think Aristotle, like, that's a valid criticism. I think Aristotle's intent is to keep people in that zombified zone, and not, he's not recognizing the soul, if you will, or the interplay of it. And with
it does come across as a nice advice. Okay, cultivate good habits and make it your habit if you think it is good.
Well, I want to jump in on here. Hey guys.
Hello.
Because habits to me it appears to be like they're good discoveries that became universal ways of being for the general society. So I was going to say before, because everyone was talking about habits and whether they're good or bad, but is any habit bad if you're always conscious of the fact that it's a habit? So then we get onto the discussion of self-discovery. Like, if we were just to take things that are traditional actions at face value, and like a child just goes to church, as you were just saying, Scott, without any real actual living principle inside of them that guides that action, then it's like blind faith, right? They're just doing it because their parents do it. So the habit, for it to be good, has to be relearned, has to have a renaissance in each and every individual that's born, if it's to have its same effect that it had when it was first discovered, as a manner, as a habit, like whatever became a habit was originally a discovery principle, the good ones at least, like holding a door for a lady, or the way we conduct dinner mannerisms, or the way we conduct traditions in religion and rituals and so on and so forth, the way we use geometry, the way how everything takes on order and form, is through these discoveries that are made. But whenever it's taught in an Aristotelian way, as true as it may be, if it's just taught in this way as like, that's the facts, don't ask questions about it, take it at face value for what it is.
Kind of like math is taught.
Yeah, so the child is like, okay, great, and then I'll go do an exam and I'll repeat what you just said, and it will come down to my ability to repeat as to whether I'll get graded an A or an F. So we actually, today, we value people based on their ability to imitate blindly, rather than their ability to actually become the action in the principle itself. So you have the moral, you have the learned principle, but until the individual actually discovers the principle as a mode of behavior within themselves and creates it as a habitual action, and they're conscious of that habitual action, then it won't know goodness inside of that individual. It won't actually have the same effect as what it would have done in someone who understood and had discovered the principle again, rediscovered it inside of themselves. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They put it in a multitude of ways, because I always come back to what Schiller says. For me, Schiller's really the highest ground in terms of that explanation, like the unification of the left and right brain, the two sides of your character, the sensual, the moral. And that's like that, the sensual is obviously the perfection of humanity, and the moral is obviously our connection with God. And Schiller's really trying to answer that, like, how do those two forces act in a coincidence without it appearing to be any kind of division whatsoever? Well, I think that can only happen when all of the habits or manners or traditions, morals that we're taught, become active in us. So like alive. So like I was going to say, to be conscious of the habit as you're doing it. So you're always reapplying, like, am I practicing this the right way? Like, am I doing this with the good intention? Am I doing, this habit? What is my intention behind it? Why am I doing it? And then we get to the other questions like the how, the what, and so on and so forth. So,
and what is the sufficient result or effect?
Exactly. Which is another way of talking about an outcome. So instead of it being like an outcome-based education, it's still outcome-based, isn't it? It's still we do things based on the outcome, but not to that effect that it becomes like a blinded kind of like, oh, just do good because it's good to do good. Like, no, but you're a sensual person, so you have to actually feel it. Like, there has to be something that whenever you're not in the slum of Kenya, or whenever you're not in a place of suffering, you can relive it to generate that action day after day, even though you're separated physically from it. There's still that metaphysical connection with it where you can regenerate that active principle inside of you, so that it's not habitual. Things are happening because you're making them in line with the universal principles.
Yeah.
And you're feeling something really powerful by doing it. So then that's where your senses become not evil thing, but actually like one of the best parts of you, like something which you're really proud to have and really happy to have. And there's humility in that, because you, upon knowing that you have them, you know that they were God-given. So instead of that clashing, it actually unifies, and then you have a circular individual.
I like what you said there about feeling powerful by doing it, like there's
the power of it is in the action. Because the knowledge is great, and when you read it off a paper, and everyone I'm sure here knows that feeling of like a certain kind of euphoria when you suddenly have something from what you've learned before in the past, maybe from that outcome-based education even, suddenly connects with a new event or guiding action that's happening in history or whatever, and you're making these connections, and you have that moment of eureka, so to speak. That's what it feels like when those two pillars coincide. When your senses and your morals, because you've guided your morals to learn something that would better your life, now you feel good because of it. So that's one part of it. But then when you actually take that and then make it active in the form of teaching someone else, or like, well, yeah, teaching's one of the best jobs there is on the planet. So I guess that's like the highest form of that, like being an active instrument of knowledge. Then you're really getting close to what this individual looks like the teacher, the ultimate teacher, like the teacher we never had, probably. That's what Schiller's been like for me, the teacher you never had.
Have you been? Okay, yeah.
And so and then of course, like it was I was watching a season, A Man for All Seasons, a couple of weeks back, and there's this character in it called Richard, And Thomas More is doing his bit. We all know about Thomas More, but Richard's really like an important character because Richard's a good man. Like you can see, he's this young fella. He's in Thomas More's court, and he's kind of this
13th century.
Yeah, he's an essential part of the story actually, and many times he comes to Thomas More to ask for like a position of, basically a position of vanity. For Richard, it would be that like either a lawyer or something in the court. Like he wants to be close to money. But he's a good man. Like this Richard, he's not a bad man. He has good intentions. You can see that. Like, and he's quite shy, and he's almost a bit. He's quite naive and juvenile. And he's if you would put him in the crowd, he's probably the laughing stock of the crowd, you know, because he's quite gullible. Anyway, every time he goes to Thomas More to ask him for something, Thomas More says, like, be a teacher. Like, be a teacher, Richard. Oh. And Richard's obviously, like, not happy with this. Like, he thinks that Thomas More's being derogatory to him, like telling him, be a teacher because you're not worth anything else, in that kind of regard. When Thomas More clearly is not actually saying that, and you can see that from the actor in the movie, is not trying to put that across either. He's really telling him, like, for your own good, be a teacher. Because what Thomas More's actually saying to Richard is, like, because of your character and your particular weakness for vanity, to put you in any other position right now would not be good for you. Like, I would not be doing you justice. So, like, trust me. And he says it to him 3 times. And 3 times Richard, you know, like, he's not, but each time he gets more, you know, pissed off, like, no, I don't want to be a teacher, like, this is ridiculous. On the 3rd time, he finally leaves Thomas More's court, and he disappears all of a sudden. We don't know where he goes. Anyway, he turns up later on, working for Thomas Cromwell, who becomes Thomas More's prosecutor. And Richard is one of the people who is Thomas More's, is like Jesus's Judas. Right, so he's the guy who goes and tells tales on Thomas More. So you just realise with this character, that, you know, all people are good. All people have virtue as an ingrained part of, you know, in the image of God. So that's very strongly set out in the Christian faith and other faiths as well, as Quan's Confucius today, and Assad previously as well. But when man doesn't become active in his knowledge, like it's not an active part of his mind, and actually takes whatever he has gained himself, and it shares it with his brother, then he ceases to be basically really human, really what he is. Like he's pretending not to be something that he is. So he's created image God, but almost like hiding from the responsibility of becoming that active part of society, you know. And so what I found very interesting listening to Quan today is how Confucius took people through these kind of like very broad, but like age groups, kind of categories, kind of stages of civilized behavior, and how you know, there's a part of that which is experience, you know, and that's the thing about human beings. Like, you might have a young person at 25, like a Schiller, who's capable of having the amount of reason that someone at 60 or 70, like Socrates, but that will only be because of the coincidence of the 2 sides of his brain. So that every time he learned something that became knowledge inside of it, he became the active part of it as a poet. In Schiller, you have both the scientist and the artist. Like, he really is one character where if you go through his writings, you know, it's really broad what we're talking about. Like, and in terms of culture as well, like Schiller's able to talk about creators. That really most people in university, really 99% of the planet, like people on the planet, are not capable of talking about in the same light that someone like Friedrich Schiller is capable of doing. You can talk about Confucius. You know, he's got his writings on Confucius and the kind of teachings from Confucius. He's also writing poetry and dramas, and then he's writing on universal history. And he's got such a huge library of work. You really see in that character, every time he learns something new, immediately he acts on it. Like, it's like the metaphysical instantly becomes physical. And he gets so close to perfection like that. In his poems, in his dramas, it gets so close to perfection. That's why Beethoven and people, they said they never wanted to take Schiller's work because, or not, yeah, Matt, you want to go on.
No. I mean, I really appreciate this because I feel like, Nick, what you're doing is creating the basis for a presentation. I really think that you could totally do this because what we're actually discussing, and these are fantastic points, is that the third cycle will be on the principle of statecraft, poetry and statecraft. So right now we're getting ready for this new cycle on the American system and a harmony of interests. But then afterwards we've got this whole new theme, and I think that would be really beautiful to be able to have like a real good exposition of Schiller's resolution of this problem of will and duty in however you want to take it. But I feel like just listening to you now, which is a great gestalt, I think that's your will and your desire and your duty all coming together here in one shot in front of my ears.
Great. I set myself up for
Wunderbar. All right, the roster is growing. We do have to run. The unfortunate thing right now is we're hosting the discussion. So by us leaving, we also have to close the discussion, which means there's no infrastructure digitally for you guys to communicate together with at the moment. But I would say one thing we could do is maybe discuss a free moment when we could all be together. Maybe well, the week after that's not so good. But maybe either Quan to give his second part next week. Would that be something people would desire? By next week, like this coming week, like let's say Thursday, because Dave will be giving his class on Dante Alighieri on Sunday, right? To finish up this class cycle. But before then, maybe Quan could squeeze in either this Thursday, or we could squeeze it in sometime in the next weeks. But would this Thursday be okay for people if I just threw it out there?
I'm okay with that.
Kathleen's okay with that. Scott's nodding. Assad is on the fence because he works during the weekdays. You're a worker.
I'm gonna watch it later, of course. I may not be able to participate, but I will watch it later.
All right, Nick and Bully, what do you guys think? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Do you guys start working again soon?
Yeah, tomorrow. We go back to class. We got to class and we're doing all the, a nice little bit of human programming.
I think Nick, you have some great insight into Schiller's work because of you being a dancer and the work you've done in that.
Yeah, I cheated somewhat. I have a handicap. That's for sure. Yeah. I'll go more into it next time because I can keep talking, and if I do, once I start, it will roll on those steam trains.
Nick
it's
and I
appreciative. And I mean, Quan, I just want to say, really, thank you so much for going and fleshing out a lot of these concepts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, we're looking forward to next Thursday. I'm looking forward to it.
You stimulate
Thanks
a lot
for interactions.
Thanks for the interesting discussion.
Oh,
yeah.
Thinking for an interesting discussion.
You kindled it as only a good Confucian could do. All right, take care, guys.
Okay.
Ciao, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks for everything. Okay.